we stopped at Maddie's. And in we went to Maddie's. Arthur Fiedler, his wife, and two friends from over the neck who he was staying with. We went upstairs, and Kenny opened the upstairs, which was not generally open at those days. And he served a wonderful meal. But before the meal, of course, the bar was open, and I went over to see, sat with Arthur, and I said, "What would you like to drink?" And he said, "Gin." And I said, "What would you like with it?" He says, "Nothing." So I went over, got him a glass of gin, of one of Kenny's favorite pours, and I brought it back to the table and I gave it to him. And I said, "Arthur, do you think if I drink gin like you do, I could conduct the Boston Pops?" Well, he enjoyed that comment. And it was just a wonderful experience for the town. And I know he never would forget it, but and neither do most of the people around the town at that time.
I remember the parade well, and I'm trying to find a couple of pictures of it, but good times for sure. I'm wide open to wherever the conversation wants to go here, folks. Tell us about your memories of the 70s.
Well, one of my fondest memories of the 70s, and Roger probably doesn't even remember this, but Dave Fleming, Roger, and Steve Cohen and I did a lot of blue fishing and striped bass fishing those early summers. You don't remember me, Roger, but you made an impression on me. You remember?
I remember you, Michael.
What's that? Yeah,
I
we used to
remember you.
out of the Dolphin Yacht Club.
That's right.
Yeah, with Dave Fleming.
Yep.
Yeah, those were fun times.
Roger, you were telling some good stories the other day of fishing next to Gerald Smith.
Yeah, but I like to tell about Gerald Smith, but Dave Fleming was a good fishing buddy back then.
The other day of
We had a
fishing
good time.
Gerald Smith. I don't know why we had a little double talk over there, but how about the Great Race? Any Great Race participants on this call?
No.
I don't know why.
Who remembers Bobby Rowland's trick in the Great Race? Do you guys remember that? Anybody?
Was he the one that walked across the causeway?
Yes, he was in the ocean race.
Yeah.
And he might have been Reggie Hartley too. And he had the metal part of a baby carriage. So these Olympic rowers were going out around the neck and ahead of everybody. And they actually got into Marblehead Harbor, and they were walking up Front Street to the finish line at Maddie's when Bobby Rowland and Reg Hartley came through an alleyway and pulling their boat on the cart and won the race. They came right ahead of these guys as they were trudging up the street. No one remembers that one?
No.
I remember it quite well.
Jack, this is Susan Lipsky.
Susan.
I sent Lauren some photos that I had dug up of the Great Race.
Yeah,
I don't know if they got to you. She
yes, let me see.
confirmed that she got them. Yes, I arrived late, just in time. I think that was sort of toward the end, just in time to see people parachuting in. And I don't remember what year that is, but I'm pretty sure it's 70s. If anybody recognizes anybody, they're not great photos.
The old home port there. So it ended for a few years in front of Maddie's, didn't it? And then it ended at the beach in later years.
Yep.
Correct.
So
When
again,
did-
I was between 5 and 15 years old when this was all going on. So we used to look for the guys that would pass out and go t-shirt hunting. If we could pull a t-shirt out of somebody's hand, we won. And most of the fun that I remember was head over at the beach. But it's crazy. What was it, Watertown to Marblehead?
Yes,
when did it
Can't
stop?
imagine.
I did it. I did it once or twice with a gang on the bicycles.
My gosh. I mean, I remember there was a bicycle contraption. Maybe this was it in the picture here. But probably not this one, but this one was multiple bike riders. Looks like 4.
Looks like it is, yeah.
Yeah, I remember a two-decker bike setup going through town at one point. But I mean, you know, the kegs were rolling off the back of the boats, off the back of the trucks, and I don't think they stopped. It was, it's no wonder we can't do it today.
Unfortunately, as a sitting member of Board of Selectmen during that time, it was very difficult for us to issue a permit to have that, excuse me, kind of race and activities at the beach. And it continued, of course, it was sponsored by the Elks. But it continued for quite a few years. And then it got to a point where, whoa, you can't let this continue, because there were some sad spots during the tenure of the Great Race. But we eventually had to call it off due to the public drinking got out of hand.
So I think we just lost Jack. So I will be
no.
your host for the moment. Obviously, I was not here in the 70s. I wasn't on the planet in the 70s. So if you all can carry on with your memories, I can also call on Louise, because I know Louise, if she wants to share.
I was just going to say, I graduated from high school in Marblehead High School in 1970. So I don't really remember the 70s in Marblehead, because I spent 70 to 74 in college out in Western Mass. And then I was in grad school for another couple of years. And then I got my first job in Vermont. And of course, my family was still here. So I often was back to visit. But a lot of these big events I wasn't around for. So it's interesting to hear people's perspective. I was living on Marlborough Street in the Back Bay for the blizzard of '78. And I had the only store you could get into in Boston, in my neighborhood in Back Bay, was a little convenience store. And by the time I got in, all they had left was candy. I did have a gas stove, and I was able to, and I lost power, but I was able to call my parents in Marblehead, and they would put the phone next to their TV where they still had power. So I would listen to news reports of what was going on in the world through the phone via Marblehead, via Boston News. And I think after about 4 days, I managed to get a bus up to Marblehead and evacuate Boston. It was bad everywhere. But I'm sort of here to listen, because I wasn't around for much of the 70s in Marblehead. I was away.
Well, this is Susan Miller-Lipsky again. Louise reminded me, I'd forgotten, I don't know how, about the blizzard of '78. I guess it's been a very long time. I was around until '72, And then I went on a 2-week vacation to Italy after college and came back 5 years later because you could do things like that back then. In 1977. I came back just in time for the blizzard of 78. And I remember I was living in Boston, probably job hunting. And I remember everybody getting around, the T was stopped and everyone was getting around cross-country skis on the T lines, the above ground, where the above ground trolleys or trains would have gone. Everybody in Boston was, well, a lot of people were getting around with cross-country skis. So that's a big memory.
Mhm.
Sorry that I've lost my connection at the office. But I'm on my phone, so I'm not able to pull up photos. I hope we didn't lose the Facebook Live. Thank you, Amy, for looking into that. And what else do we have? How about some stores around town? I know Hector's Pup was downtown. I know that our family grocery store was there, Osborne's. And what do we have? We had, and then, as I said earlier, Village Plaza, Brigham's, the record store.
Pennies,
about Louis?
Crosby's.
Pennies and Crosby's, yeah.
Louise,
Hmm?
Don't
Damon
forget Gordon
Tucker's?
Stationery.
What's that, Rick?
Louis.
Don't forget good old Gordon Stationery.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How about Winslow's potato chips?
Was
And
does
Winslow's-
anyone remember Damon Tucker's?
I sure do.
I love the Winslow potato chips, and we often went and also bought their pretzel sticks, a whole big container of them. They were a treat for my kids when they were growing up to get one
Yeah.
of those. And
And we used to go in as little kids and he would let us, give us hot, fresh potato chips. It was awesome.
that's right.
Hot cheese chips were better.
Yeah, you know what? I think you're probably right.
How about Louis? I can remember that young women, like what I was in those days, we preferred going to Louis instead of to Penny's because there was a checkout guy at Penny's who liked to pat our bottoms.
What?
Yeah.
And Louis would always be standing there, right, at the kind of the entrance exit, and
Yep.
seemed somehow more interesting than next door, but you got your choice, which one you want to go to.
I tried to cash a check with Louis one time, and I wasn't the shopper in the family, so he really didn't know me, and he said, I can't cash your check. So I went home, and a minute later the phone rang, and he said, "Oh, Mr. Morris, I'm so sorry, I didn't realize you were Mrs. Morris's husband."
Oh, gosh, that's.
I remember I graduated Marblehead High School in 72, and I remember that year, the drinking age was 18. And so in my senior year, me and all my friends, we used to go into the Riptide, where beers were 10 cents for a glass or 25 cents for a mug. And we spent many a day there.
Sounds like in the 70s, Marblehead still had kind of a small town feel. I mean,
It sure did.
having left for a long time after high school and only visiting periodically, what always struck me when I would come back is that a lot of the places that I remembered as empty lots, open space, were being filled with buildings.
Right.
And there seemed to be much less open space and more people coming in all the time. Now it's everything I remember from my childhood as open space is gone, is filled. And I don't see as many people that I know anymore. You know, that's,
It's become much more transient.
yeah, a lot more.
I also remember towards the end of my high school career, Derek Sanderson, who played for the Boston Bruins at the time, had a condo at Glover Landing. And he used to have used to host parties almost every weekend with lavish layout of food and everything else. He was never there. But as high school kids, we used to crash it all the time.
It always amazed me, the combination of an 18-year-old drinking age and open campus in Marblehead.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. We had it on campus. That was a blast. Well, in those days, and Roger probably remembers this, in those days, if I got caught smoking a joint in the bathroom, it was, put it out and get back to class. If I got caught smoking a cigarette in the bathroom, a regular cigarette, it was suspension for 3 days.
You weren't at the hippie line.
The school had kind of a no hands-off policy when it came to smoking pot. And they just didn't, I guess they didn't want the notoriety, so they just didn't press it.
I'm sure many remember the smoking line. That crazy? I mean, to think that there was a line that you couldn't cross.
Right.
And right on the main entrance into the school. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Jack, there was one at the junior high too, wasn't there? There was one at the junior high and the high school.
Was there?
They allowed us? That's amazing.
Yeah, it was sort of behind the gym by the front entrance to the right, if I remember correctly.
You're right.
Kind of where Mr. Tuveson's class was, off to the right.
Okay. In that alleyway there?
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Okay.
At the junior.
I do remember sort of at the junior high, there was a corridor that went sort of past the metal shop down towards the annex, the new addition. And there was a teacher's lounge right in there. And when the teacher's lounge door would open, the billow of cigarette smoke used to come out of the door in between classes.
Yeah.
My gosh. But I remember, Marblehead, what I remember is in the 70s in Marblehead was, and I think, somebody mentioned how it used to, Marblehead was more blue collar, and sort of homey. I remember sort of more houses needed paint that didn't need paint. And, and there was still, although the malls had started to come into play and things like, Almies and places like that, you still had the sense that the community relied on the businesses and the businesses relied on the community. And you could, if you were frequent enough, you could stop into the store and cash a check or pick something up and know that it was put on your slip. Or, I know my brother remembers delivering groceries to people's houses, and, most of the people's houses, you'd walk in the back door and you'd put the milk and eggs in the refrigerator for them and leave the rest of the stuff on the counter. And it was about the 80s that all that changed.
Jack, it's funny that you should mention that. I worked in high school. I worked at the Beach Bluff grocery store, and Friday afternoons after class, after school was over, my job was to deliver groceries. And you're absolutely right. I mean, I would just go leave the groceries on the kitchen table, go in the back door, and that was it. And nobody locked their doors, and everybody was friendly. And those days are gone.
Which was the milk company that continued, I think, into the 80s delivering in town? And certainly the milkman used to come into my back door if I'd left a note and said, I'm not going to be home, would you come on in?
Whiting's.
Well, Jack, during that time, don't forget there were 7 gasoline stations from what we call today as the Five Corners or whatever, up until Central Street. 5, and they were all working gasoline stations, making a living.
Yeah.
Now there is 0.
Bill, wasn't the gas lines, weren't they in the 70s? When they ran the shortage of gasoline and the cars were all lined up. I remember on Pleasant
Was in the
Street.
early
Well,
70s.
that was late.
Yes.
No, that was later. That was later in the late 70s. I want to say
Okay.
78 was the Gulf embargo.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the lines down to Cashies were very long.
Yeah. Because I had graduated college at that point and was working, and I had a boat. And I used to have a 5-gallon gas can, and I'd go down to the harbor and buy gas in a gas can and put it in my car so I didn't have to bother with the odd evens. I paid a little extra, but I got gas
Right?
because the boat and the dock, they were open all the time.
That's smart. That's a good one. Those are the, I think we have 3 gas stations left. 2 are on the water and 1 is at the town barn to fill the town equipment up. But that's all we have left. No public consumption on the roads. But I think the gas stations also, the demise of the gas stations and the service stations, if you will, are also because of the cars today.
Well, I think it's also because of the value of the real estate they were sitting on.
Well, yeah. Well, and I know the economics behind, the gas stations are, they can pull out of a small town and go to the next town over and still know that they're going to get you to drive there to fill up your tank. So if they pull the rug out from underneath you in your own town. What else do we have for the 70s? Rick, you got to have something.
It was fun to be a kid, that's for sure.
It sure was.
Right? You could just go all around, do whatever you wanted legally. We rode bikes all over town. We'd leave in the summer. I remember leaving the house at like 8 a.m. and as long as I was home by 5:30, so Barry didn't yell at me, I mean, everything was fine. Right? Same with you, Jack, right? We were just out.
Yeah. And there was usually a straight line from point A to point B, regardless of whose backyard you went through, or whether you took the tracks. We'd go up Maverick Street, get on the tracks, go right or left, and end up at one of the schools or downtown. There were certainly, and there weren't as many fences, I guess, is the best way to put that. I mean, some of my memories are, you go down to Lynn Marine Supply, or you go to the transportation and you pick up a drop line and a weight and a hook, and you go over to McLean's and you get a bag of broken clams, broken steamers, and you could fill up a 5-gallon bucket of fish in about 10 minutes. The harbor was filled with fish and boats. And when I was a kid, this probably would have been close to the mid 70s. My mom worked at Barney Get Seafoods, and it was sort of the cusp between the boatyard being filled with wooden boats and the emergence of fiberglass. So, the boatyards in Marblehead were filled with craftsmen instead of pickup trucks and boat haulers. And so, it was just, you're right. Whoever said it, it was more like a small town feel, certainly, than it is now.
And Jack, they never chased the kids away either. The boatyard kids, we were always playing, right?
Yeah.
In Graves Yacht Yard, and they would just wave at us. Nowadays, I'm sure you'd get thrown out. We'd be jumping off the crane pier. We'd be running around and no one cared. It was beautiful.
It's funny. Somebody on the shipyard page was talking the other day about when the kids would jump off of the rocks at Red Steps, that Millie Cuff would be there as a regular fixture, Peter Cuff's mom. And if you did something wrong and you got home, your parents would say, "Oh, I heard you went off the rocks where you weren't supposed to today," or something like that. And so as much as it was a time when you were just as afraid, if sometimes not more afraid, of getting caught by somebody else's parent than you were of getting caught by your own parents. I remember going to this was a little bit past the late 70s, but into the early 80s. But Joe Cuff got me one day. Joe Homan got me one day going across the causeway a little too fast in my dad's car, and he said, "Do you want me to tell your dad you're doing this?" And I said, "No, Mr. Homan, please." So, and fortunately he kept that secret.
Yeah, in those days, you'd rather go to the police station than tell your dad something.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Yeah. Again, or get caught by one of your neighborhood watch guard parents that would
Well,
usually keep an eye out on it.
Yeah.
Who had a paper route?
I had one over the neck.
Hawthorne
really?
News.
Hawthorne News. I wish I still had my Globe bag. The best job was the Globe and the Herald. Paid the most, and then the Salem News, and then the worst job in the world was the reporter in the Messenger.
How about the Boston Traveler?
You got me on that one. You're dating me on that one.
The lone item.
The reporter was like, you had to go back home and your bag was out to here. I mean, they talk about kids' knapsacks being too heavy, but we were Sherpas for the news companies.
I really miss that reporter coming free every week. You put it on your coffee table and you could just, whatever was going on, it was somewhere in there. You could check the reporter. And now it seems like oftentimes nobody knows anything about what's going on unless you know somebody. And it's of course you can use anything Marblehead and some of those things, but still I still miss it, and I do subscribe, so still feel it's a good resource that I don't want to miss out on. It's paper.
Yeah. News is so instantaneous, along with all the opinions that come with it these days, for good, the bad, and the ugly. But it's hard to believe. We supported two weekly newspapers in Marblehead, let alone, we got the Salem News and the Boston Globe on a regular basis too. Stanley.
Yes. I thought I'd go back and talk a little about the blizzard of 78. Because I got a little different view than you fellows. I happen to live next to Red's Pond on a hill 250 feet from the street. Now, the day before, I'm in Cambridge working, and there's horror stories on the radio, and there isn't a flake of snow showing in the street. So I come home, I say, what the heck are they talking about? It blew and snowed the next night, and I had 7-foot drifts between me and the street. At that point, my father decides it's time to rebuild the snowblower. So he goes down on the lathe and spends 2 days rebuilding the snowblower. He then blows the street, which is, at that point, they'd managed to put one road through, one lane. You couldn't go anywhere. Then when that was finally, they brought in a snowblower from Canada, one of these throw it 150 feet jobs, and they came down and cleared the streets with that. The other thing,
Wow.
my sister lived up on Cloutman's Lane. When the Global Hope went ashore, the fuel tank for the engine breached and 2 houses got it. The front of her house was covered in fuel oil. The oil company had to clean up the house, and they spent most of the summer cleaning the beach because of that fuel oil, and it only hit 2 houses. So that's a little piece of history.
Wow. Is Bill Conley still on the call?
Yep.
Tell us about that snowblower.
Well, that was an interesting adventure. Dick Holman, who was the superintendent of highways, he was tears in his eyes that he lost a lot of his equipment and he was desperate. And he informed us, the Board of Selectmen, and we had an emergency meeting. We declared an emergency and our meeting spot was in front of Cashie's filling station in the middle of Atlantic Avenue. And I can't remember whether Joe Whipple was there, Marilyn Reese was there, or who the other selectmen were there. But at that point in time, we told Dick to go ahead and get your snow blower. He described it to us. It was on a flatbed in the freight yards in, I think it was Everett or Charlestown. And there were two of them. One had been claimed by another city, and we got that one. So Alan Bailey, who ran the snowblower during the emergency, he and Dick went up and got the snowblower, brought it to Marblehead, and basically that bailed our town out of unbelievable. Now, that snowblower is still working, or I believe it's still working. Maybe I've
It
lost.
is. No, you're right, it is.
And we bought that in 1978. And everybody says, well, how much did it cost? Well, it cost about $70,000. However, our clever town accountant, Bart Snow, worked it in with the emergency funds that we used for the seawalls and the fences and the destruction of the town, and sent it to the state. The state picked up the tab, didn't cost the town anything.
Wow. I remember we were jumping off the rocks, working house rocks, in front of the old high school into the snow that it was so deep. And then when the roads were still closed, when the snowblower made the first pass, and we'd land, and then we'd go through the snowbank, and we'd end up sitting on our butts on the street. It was a crazy time for sure. But that was, I mean, the Constitution,
Oh boy.
there were a few times in the history that I remember of town where, Marblehead just came out in an amazing way. With everybody shut down, people were looking out after everybody after the blizzard, making sure everybody's neighbors were okay. Everybody was out walking in the streets. I wish I had my internet connection, because I've got a great picture of sort of your back towards where Bill was just talking about, in front of Cashie's, looking towards Tony's Pizza, and Joe Cuff was walking in the middle of the street on his usual beat, but he was surrounded by a bunch of other people. And it was just, those times were hard times, but they were times when Marblehead really rallied together. It's pretty cool times.
School was closed for a week, wasn't it, after the blizzard?
The whole state was closed for a week.
Yeah, well, and the state too. I guess I remember mainly because of my kids, we're all home. We'll just go for walks. We'll hang around.
Well,
Jeepers.
it turned out
Couldn't
it
go
was-
into Boston to work. That was okay.
it was really 4 days. On Friday, they allowed you to take public transportation into Boston and go to work, and I did. You had to take public transportation. I remember walking down to the bus, taking the bus, and going into Boston. You were shut down Monday to Friday, but Friday they partially opened.
Right.
Right.
There probably weren't too many people at work there with you, were there, Stanley?
Well, there were quite a few. Surprising.
I remember one of the more immediate reactions, at least I was living in Boston, was the air got really clear. There were no cars, there were no planes, it was quiet, it was beautiful weather, sunny, and all this snow and people out in the street, and it was like a party. To some extent, but the air seemed so much clearer without all the traffic.
The only lines were in front of Maddie's and
Right.
and the landing, and then we have a tendency to to flock to the coast and flock to the bars when when we get a big storm event. But no, I mean, I've noticed that a lot just since COVID and obviously after 9/11, without the, you know, without the airplanes, it's
Right.
a little surreal.
Yeah.
But and that, you know, back in the 70s, you know, our family had one car, so there were far fewer. I remember my mom, if my mom needed the car, she'd drive my father to work in the morning, and we'd usually hop in with her for the ride over to Salem. But the cars burned more emissions than 3 of today's cars at the same time.
Right.
You know, and you know, another thing I remember from that era was, you know, there were always car accidents. We had a tree in front of our house that the cars would come down over the hill, and I can't believe the tree made it, but the tree's still there. But there always seemed to be car accidents in town, but I don't know, maybe that was just a looking through different glasses, and now I'm a lot older.
No,
The early-
you're
the early
you're
70s, you
absolutely
could-
right.
The
We
early
used to live.
70s,
We
you
used
could
to
fill your tank
live.
for $2.
What's
we-
that?
In the early 70s, you could fill your tank for $2. Gas was 30 cents a gallon.
Jeepers.
We used to hear car accidents all the time. We lived on Ratland Road, which is way up high off West Shore Drive. And you know, when you come down past Pequot and the road turns, there was a big tree there. There were always accidents. And we'd hear, you know, at 11, 12, 1 in the morning, a crash probably every 6 months. I think that
Yeah.
tree is still there, isn't it?
I don't know. I don't know. It's pretty amazing though. Willie, help me out a little bit, Bill. What was going on on the waterfront? Were you down, were you at the transportation at the time, or was that after?
Well, that was kind of well, I started there in the late 40s. And one interesting, I don't know how many people remember the ferry boats, but I know Rick Weed, your sister, used to shadow Johnny Howe, who was the pilot of the captain of the Blonde that used to go to Salem Willows, Lee. She used to go with him all the time and spend a lot of time on board. However, the last ferry sailed from Marblehead in 1968. It was the Kelpie. And Collie Williams was the captain. And that was the last traditional ferry dating back to just after the Civil War on the demise in Marblehead. Of course, you spoke a while ago to you guys and the fishermen. The transportation company used to have approximately 21 dories. There was a mixture of Grand Banks, a couple of Chamberlains, and punts and skiffs that people used to rent out and go drop line fishing. And again, you fishermen know that they used to fill their boat for flounder. And most of the flounders, they used to row. And of course, we didn't have outboards. They used to row up off the Electric Light Wharf in that area, and they would fill their boats with flounders and come back about noontime, but they'd start at 7 o'clock in the morning.
Wow. And again, it was the time where we were transitioning from wood to fiberglass.
Yeah.
On the harbor a lot too during the 70s, and outboards. A lot more people had outboards, right?
Right.
And the flounder that they bring home were huge. They weren't like today. I used to bring home some flounder in those days, and my mother referred to them as doormats.
Yeah. Yeah, no. And that was, I mean, that's the sad part about it is, you know, into the late 70s, into the 80s is when you couldn't, you know, you couldn't leave the harbor with an outboard without going over somebody's gill net, and that just got overfished and depleted. Although it's nice that they're coming back, but I mean, I remember as a kid, you could go down to Commercial Street and look over the edge of the dock, and it was just, you know, there was some sort of bait fish that was just filling the harbor, and you could almost walk across it.
We used to fill a bucket with smelts down there when I was a kid.
Yeah, just dip it in.
Yep.
Yep.
I believe that the Constellation was built at graves out of wood. It might have been the last America's Cup built of wood.
Interesting. I don't know if you were on the call, Monty, but I started the conversation with the fact that mid 70s Ted Hood won the America's Cup with Courageous, and ironically the America's Cup series starts today in Newfoundland and in New Zealand with boats going 60 miles an hour. I mean, it's crazy.
Well,
I don't regard those as sailboats. Those are starships.
Yeah, pretty much. 70 feet with about 5 feet in the water.
And sails made of carbon fiber that are actually airplane wings.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Don't forget the Marblehead Graves built two cup challengers, the Easterner and the Nefertiti, when they were building their boats back in the 60s and the 70s.
Now, was Courageous built here? No.
I don't think so.
Okay.
Maybe I'm thinking of Nefertiti. I believe that was built here.
Yep, Nefertiti was built here, and I know Easterner was built here.
I was at the launching of the Nefertiti. My wife called out the name of the towboat. So, what's her name? King Tut. Nobody knows. King Tut.
Wow.
I don't mean to be too loquacious here. Here's some trivia for you talking about the waterfront. I've had many calls over the years on you showed a frozen lobster boat at the very beginning of your meeting. Well, the history that I developed on the freezing of the harbor, it froze over many times. And I'll just read this to you, whether you, I hope I don't bore you. But in
No, this is good.
1898, it froze in 1907, 1912, 1934, of which I walked across the harbor, but I think my mother had a little something in her stomach that allowed me to go across with her. In 1961, 1968, and 1978. And further research on this, it was way back, it was closed on February 9th through the 10th in 1904 on the account of ice. That came out of a history book. And Rhodes' history also confirms that it froze over in 1780. So there are your lists of how many times the harbor is frozen over.
Wow. Wow. It still blows me away that, it wasn't that long ago, certainly within 100 years, that people didn't have central heat and central electricity in their houses. That blows me away.
Unbelievable.
Yeah. Coffee. Yeah. And then you think of cold days like that. This is great. We're 5 minutes of 11 here. This has been great. Again, if anybody has not signed up to be a member of the Marblehead Museum, I know that Amy's going to have a link in the chat box. And I also know that Amy wants to tell everybody about some upcoming programming. So Amy, it's all yours.
Great. Thanks for hosting, Jack. Thanks for everybody for participating today. We did have some people follow on Facebook and we had a little bit of a technical difficulty, but there's some really great comments. So if you all are on Facebook, you should go check out those comments and we'll reach out to those people as well. This is not the end of the series. We do meet every Saturday, we meet every month, the first Saturday of the month. I do know that we are trying, hopefully, to do a digitization event in May. So stay tuned for that. I want to remind everybody we do have an upcoming program this Thursday, the 11th. It is a lecture on Boston's historic Omni Parker House by award-winning photographer and Parker House historian Susan Wilson, and that's going to be at 7 p.m. on Zoom, and you can get your tickets online. I do want to remind everybody that our annual meeting will be March 25th. So the business portion of the meeting will start at 6:30, and then we're going to have Rick Detweiler talk about Fort Sewell again, because we know that Fort Sewell is a hot topic in Marblehead. So please join us for that. That is a free event, and you can register online for the link. And I just want to remind everybody that we do have a series of book club meetings throughout the year. We actually are having the author join us for the one on March 23rd, and that's on Prohibition. But we do have one on the Civil War in May. So basically what happens to the Civil War veterans when they come home. And so this book talks about that. And then in April, we're really excited. We're going to be having Mary Beth Norton speak about her book, 1774, The Long Year of Revolution. I know Marbleheaders love the American Revolution because Marblehead played such an important role during that time. So that should be a really great program. That is a public program. So please, check out our upcoming programs page there. And as Jack said, if you're not already a member, I believe all of you are, but tell your friends. The link is there in the chat, and feel free to reach out to Lauren or myself here at the museum whenever you can. So thank you.
Thank you, Amy. And I'll just add that Amy and Lauren are just our amazing staff at the Marblehead Museum, and are just doing such a great job and seamlessly supporting the history of Marblehead and enhancing the history of Marblehead, especially over this past year. I know that we're looking, typically we have our guides breakfast in May, and I know that everybody at the museum is looking forward to getting back to normal and having everybody's faces come and visit our property. So thank you to Amy. Thank you to everybody for showing up, and we'll see you next month. Have a great day, everybody.
Thank
So
you.
long.
You.
Good
Thanks.
job.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you.